Two super typhoons, 5 days apart. One nation still underwater. On November 4th, Super Typhoon Kalmaegi slammed into northern Luzon with winds of 185 kilometers per hour. Before the floodwaters receded, before the debris was cleared, before families could return home, a second monster formed. On November 9th, Super Typhoon Uwan made landfall in the same region. Same intensity, same path. 5 days later, more than 1.4 million people displaced. At least 27 dead. Evacuation centers that never emptied. Emergency teams that never rested. This defies every statistical norm of tropical cyclone clustering in the Western Pacific. Is this the Philippines' deadliest November in modern history? Kalmaegi tore through Cagayan Valley and Isabela on November 4th. Power lines snapped. Roads buckled under landslides. Rivers burst their banks. By November 6th, evacuation centers held 400,000 people. Rescue teams were still pulling families from rooftops. Then the warnings came again. On November 7th, forecasters at Pagasa tracked a new system organizing 800 kilometers east. By November 8th, it had a name, Uwan, and it was accelerating toward the same provinces still reeling from Kalmaegi. Shelters already at capacity received new evacuation orders. Roads destroyed 5 days earlier now had to bear convoys of fleeing families. Emergency stockpiles meant to last weeks were gone. On the evening of November 9th, Uwan made landfall in Dinalungan, Aurora. Winds hit 185 kilometers per hour. Gusts reached 230 kilometers per hour. Exactly 916,860 people were evacuated across 12 provinces. Airlines canceled 325 domestic and 61 international flights. Seaports closed, stranding 6,600 workers and passengers. Families who evacuated twice in 1 week. Shelters running out of food. Roads destroyed by Kalmaegi, now submerged by Uwan. Pagasa issued signal number 5, the highest warning level. The government ordered forced evacuations, but there was nowhere left to go. Will the infrastructure hold, or has the country already broken? The final week of October brought unusually warm sea surface temperatures across the Philippine Sea. Water temperatures reached 29 to 30 degrees Celsius. Vertical wind shear, the atmospheric force that typically disrupts storm formation, remained anomalously low. Perfect conditions for rapid cyclone development. Between November 1st and 3rd, Tropical Storm Kalmaegi intensified from a tropical depression to a super typhoon in just 36 hours. Its track was unmistakable, a direct collision course with northern Luzon. On November 4th, Kalmaegi made landfall. Cagayan Valley bore the brunt. Rainfall exceeded 500 millimeters in 24 hours across multiple provinces. Rivers, swollen beyond capacity, carved new channels through villages. Soil, already saturated from October rains, turned entire hillsides into mudslides. Then on November 5th, while Kalmaegi still churned over Luzon, meteorologists detected another disturbance. Tropical depression, 26W, formed in the same thermal corridor just 800 kilometers east. By November 7th, it became Tropical Storm Uwan. By November 8th, it was a super typhoon. Forecasters compared tracks. The paths were nearly identical. The intensities matched. And the timeline was impossible. The Philippines averages 20 typhoons per year. Historically, major systems arrive 10 to 14 days apart, giving the ground time to absorb, rivers time to recede, and populations time to recover. This time, there were 5 days. The ground hadn't dried, the rivers hadn't receded, rescue teams hadn't slept, and a second Category 5 equivalent storm was 5 days out. Saturated soil, overflowing rivers, exhausted emergency teams, and 185 km/h winds bearing down again. The damage wasn't just about wind speed, it was about what the storms hit. The Philippines has lost nearly half of its forest cover since 1990. The Sierra Madre mountain range, which runs along Luzon's eastern coast, once acted as a natural barrier against Pacific typhoons. Dense forests absorbed rainfall, stabilized slopes, and slowed storm surges. But decades of illegal logging, agricultural expansion, and infrastructure development stripped the mountains bare. When roots vanish, the ground loses its grip. What used to absorb becomes a landslide. Of the 27 confirmed deaths from Uwan, the majority were caused not by wind, but by flash floods and landslides. Entire hillsides collapsed in Aurora and Kazan provinces. Debris flows buried homes in minutes. Villages built on cleared slopes had no buffer. Climate patterns compounded the vulnerability. The 2024 to 2025 La Nina cycle brought warmer than average sea surface temperatures across the western Pacific. Ocean heat content, the energy reserve that fuels tropical cyclones, reached record levels. These conditions create what meteorologists call a typhoon superhighway. Sustained periods where multiple intense storms can develop in rapid succession. By November 2024, the Western Pacific had already produced 26 named storms. Forecasters noted a troubling trend. The gap between systems was shrinking, but the infrastructure could not keep pace. Drainage systems in Metro Manila and northern Luzon were designed using 50-year historical averages for rainfall. Those averages no longer apply. Urban sprawl filled natural floodplains. New developments rose on reclaimed land without adequate flood defenses. Evacuation centers built after Typhoon Haiyan in 2013 were considered state-of-the-art. They were designed to house 500,000 people during a single major storm. When Kalmaegi hit, they sheltered 400,000. When Uwan followed, the system collapsed. The defenses were built for one storm at a time, not two. Nature didn't break the rules. Humans built a system that could not keep up when nature followed its new ones. In Cagayan Valley, Kalmaegi flattened entire rice fields days before harvest. Tin roofs peeled back like sardine cans. Coconut trees, some decades old, snapped at chest height. Farmers watched a year's income vanish in 6 hours. Economic losses from Kalmaegi reached 2.3 billion Philippine pesos, approximately $40 million US. For 5 days, emergency teams cleared debris. Families returned to damaged homes and began repairs. Power crews worked around the clock to restore electricity to 60% of affected areas. Children went back to school on Tuesday, November 8th. By Thursday, they were evacuating again. When Uwan made landfall on November 9th, it struck Aurora, Quezon, and Nueva Ecija provinces. The storm killed at least 27 people and injured 36 more. It displaced 1.4 million people. In Dinalungan, a mother held her daughter on a rooftop for 6 hours. The floodwaters rose faster than rescue boats could arrive. Roads leading into the town had been washed out by Kalmaegi and were now impassable. Helicopters circled overhead but could not land in the wind. By dawn, the only sound was the drone of rotors above villages that had become islands. Combined economic losses from both storms are estimated at 8 billion pesos, roughly $140 million US. Agricultural destruction alone accounts for half that total, but no number captures the farmer staring at drowned fields for the second time in 1 week. No statistic measures the child who watched their school become a shelter, then watched that shelter flood. November 6, 2024, 8:47 p.m. Inside Pagasa headquarters in Quezon City, senior forecaster Vicente Milano watched his screen with growing alarm. Kalmaegi had just exited the Philippine area of responsibility. Normally, this would mean a 10 to 14 day window before the next major system. But Tropical Depression 26W was already organizing 900 kilometers to the east, and the models showed an identical track. Sea surface temperatures had not cooled. They remained at 29.5 degrees Celsius. Wind shear stayed anomalously low. Every condition that fueled Kalmaegi was still in place. By November 7th, the system had a name, Uwan. By November 8th, it was a super typhoon. The central pressure dropped from 996 to 935 millibars in 42 hours, one of the fastest intensification events on record for November. Then the forecast models began to diverge. The European model predicted weakening before landfall. The American GFS model kept it at Category 5 intensity. The European model placed landfall 150 kilometers south of the American projection. For disaster coordinators planning evacuations across a dozen provinces, this wasn't uncertainty, it was paralysis. At 6 a.m. on November 9th, Pagasa issued signal number 5 for Aurora and Quezon provinces. Code red alerts went out to 12 provinces. Mandatory evacuation orders affected 916,860 people. 12 hours to move, nearly 1 million souls. Buses arrived, roads closed, phones died. The government opened 4,200 evacuation centers. Many still housed survivors from Kalmaegi. The military deployed 2,800 trucks. Relief agencies pre-positioned 120,000 food packs. Rescue teams staged 890 boats in coastal towns. Generators, satellite phones, water purification units moved into forward positions. The Filipino Red Cross mobilized 12,000 volunteers, but the math didn't work. Centers built for 500,000 now held 1.2 million. Supply chains had not restocked from Kalmaegi. Fuel depots in Cagayan remained offline. Manila's airports canceled 325 domestic flights, stranding 45,000 passengers. Seaports closed, trapping 6,600 cargo workers and commuters. Telecommunications infrastructure damaged by Kalmaegi created coordination blackouts. Hospitals ran low on critical supplies. Local government units responded to 2 disasters simultaneously, rescuing Uwan evacuees while distributing aid to Kalmaegi victims. In Isabela Province, 38-year-old teacher Elena Reyes faced an impossible choice. Her school had been an evacuation center after Kalmaegi. Now, with Uwan approaching, the building sat in the direct path. On the morning of November 9th, she helped move 400 evacuees to a municipal hall 12 kilometers away. The buses broke down twice. By 2 in the afternoon, rain had started. By 6 in the evening, the roads were impassable. They sheltered in a church rectory, 400 people in a space meant for 80, and waited. Some mayors delayed evacuation orders, citing false alarms from Kalmaegi. In 3 coastal towns, orders came only 6 hours before landfall. Not enough time to move elderly and disabled residents. By 8 in the evening on November 9th, Uwan's eye was 40 kilometers offshore. The clock had run out. This wasn't an anomaly. It was a preview. The Western Pacific is warming. Rapid intensification events are increasing 15% per decade. The gap between storms is shrinking. What happened to the Philippines in November 2024 defies historical records, but it no longer defies physics. The Philippines has world-class forecasting and evacuation protocols refined over decades, and still the system buckled, not from lack of preparation, but from lack of time. You can't recover from one Category 5 storm when the next one is already forming on the radar. Resilience is no longer about bouncing back. It's about staying standing when the blows come faster than the body can heal. This is the new normal. We track the storms that rewrite the rules. Subscribe to see what comes next.